In this episode of Home Theater Geeks, I continue my discussion with Mike Heiss about what he saw at CES 2025. So stick around.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek. In this episode, I continue my conversation with Mike Heiss, industry journalist and consultant who just got back from CES 2025. This time, we're going to focus on TVs. Hey, Mike, welcome back.
How you doing, Scott?
Hey, doing good. So let's get deep in the weeds here, shall we? The geeky weeds.
Ooh.
First of all,
not geeking out.
Yeah, we're geeking in. Yeah, exactly. First of all, I want to mention we have basically four major brands of TV that are at CES.
Correct.
Five if you count Sony, but they didn't show any new TVs at CES.
But they had a cool car.
Hisense, LG, Samsung, and TCL.
Correct.
And many people would say Hisense and TCL are second-tier brands.
Not anymore.
I agree with you. I don't think so. I think they have become first-tier brands.
And if you look at the market share, which they did not hesitate to point out. I'm looking in my notes here. There are months or quarters when they're number one. Number one.
Yeah.
I mean, they're pushing the envelope both in terms of features and technology, and they're not a cheapo. Yes, you can still buy them at what do you call it? You can buy them at the warehouse at Costco and Sam's Club. But as an example, TCL was at CEDIA for the first time this year, and with the 115-inch set as you might imagine. But no, these are real serious TV sets.
Yeah. And still at prices that are somewhat less than LG, Samsung, and Sony.
Well, I mean, you have to compare feature set and technology to feature set and technology.
True enough.
But enough. The answer is they are real value for the price, and they're going to give some of the other, legacy brands a run for their money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's start with Hisense. They showed a number of really cool things. One was the 136MX, 136-inch micro LED display, direct view micro LED display, 4K, Dolby Vision, and HDR10 Plus, HDMI 2.1. We're not going to see any 2.2 sets this year.
Please.
with gaming features like VRR and ALLM. Variable refresh rate and automatic, I forget what ALLM stands for.
Automatic low latency Mishigas.
Yeah. And those are for gamers. It covers 95% of BT 2020 color gamut, and it goes up to 10,000 nits of peak brightness. Holy smokes.
Them's a lot of nits. Don't be picking them nits.
Now, did you see it? I know that I'm showing you.
Yes, I did. Yes. And I mean, and I had taken some pictures, but what you just saw is actually better because it's a, sort of a studio shot. And as we said in part one, it's really hard to say which was better because the one downside of a trade show is you don't see them side by side.
Right.
Everybody shows theirs in a booth, and you have to rely on your visual memory, such as it is. They all looked good. Mm-hmm. And everybody always is playing separate demo material. So it's not like the old days where everybody was, playing Top Gun, for goodness sakes.
Right. Now they all have custom made demo material.
In very, very high resolution.
Yeah.
And clearly tailored to showcase, underwater scenes and the jellyfish and what we used to, I show my age, we used to call these Japanese demo reels when the Japanese sets brands were the big ones, and the LG and Samsung were the up-and-comers.
Right.
Now it's the reverse.
Right.
That LG and Samsung have become the legacy brands,
Right.
and the TCLs and Hisenses they're not the up-and-comers anymore. They have already come up.
Yeah, right. And that's another interesting point you make. The high-end TVs were made in Japan, and the Koreans were the up-and-comers. Now the Koreans are the legacy brands, and the Chinese are the up-and-comers or have already arrived.
Although I say advisedly, designed in Korea, not necessarily made in Korea.
Understood.
And that's going to be important.
Right. Hisense also showed a 163-inch micro LED TV, same as the 136, and has basically the same specs.
There wasn't as much attention on any of the manufacturers. LG kind of not at all. I guess I'll wait for ISC and Avixa, which are more on the commercial side. Samsung a little bit. They didn't show the wall as the wall. I don't know if they've retired that moniker as a brand. They did have some direct view LEDs, but they didn't make a big deal out of it. Both Hisense and TCL did, not necessarily as much because they're for sale, but because they can.
Right. Well, and you can buy them if you have 6 or 7 figures, probably.
Yeah, and good for you if you can.
Yeah.
But it's the attention this year
was not so much
not
on
as
these.
much on direct view LED. And although LG showed transparent this year, and I just want to kind of slide that in.
Yeah.
They did have a very interesting art display using the transparent sets. But what? Okay, fine. And they had the one they introduced last year that's now available for sale in their demo suite and on the floor. Excuse me, if that's your thing, fine. Samsung had them, but not as a display, but more for retail applications.
Right.
Which is fine. But they've kind of gone back to basics in terms of what makes the image on a standard TV, whether it's an OLED or an LED LCD, look better.
Right. And Hisense made a pretty big announcement in that regard.
Yes,
with their
they did.
116-inch, 116 UX RGB mini LED LCD TV.
Yep.
That's a mouthful.
Yep.
But the important part is the mini LEDs in the backlight, instead of being white
or blue, passing through a quantum dot film, are now directly red, green, and blue LEDs. And that is not a first. That is the first since, Sharp, Criminellis. That had to have been 10, maybe even 15 years ago at the very beginning of LED backlight. And I think Sony had one back in the day.
Yeah.
But this is the first time this technology has reappeared. And the advancements between now and then is that they're small, they're mini LEDs, and they're really bright.
Really bright.
Power is good. Really, really bright.
I mean, again, this TV is spec'd to have a peak brightness of 10,000 nits.
Yep. And, if I had the bucks and I had the wall space and I could fit it through the damn door, sure, why not?
Sure. It's 4K. It's 97% of the BT 2020 color gamut. And here's a slide, a photo you took of a display there.
Yeah, this was at the press conference.
The press conference that shows the advantages of RGB LED backlights.
And if you look over at the side where it says color control precision, that is also due to the processor.
Yes.
And one of the things and this is not new, this has been going on for the past many years, that each brand highlights the capabilities of their processor.
Yes.
And that's what is the secret sauce.
Yep.
And that's like, as in the case of the LG panels, that's why the same panel might look, I wouldn't say better or worse, because I didn't see them side by side,
right,
but perhaps different from one brand to another, because there's also not just the panel, but the actual processor that's driving it.
Which makes a big, big difference.
Yes.
No question. So this is what Hisense said was the advantage of RGB micro LED or mini LEDs. And they weren't the only company talking about it, which we'll get to in a minute.
Yep.
The last thing I wanted, well, two things more about Hisense. One was the LQ9 UST projector, ultra short throw.
Yep.
Which is a 3-laser projector, 5,000 lumens output, 110% of BT 2020 color space, which is wider than even the HDR spec says, and it can fill up to a 150-inch screen.
I did not ask them, by the way, if that was an ALR screen. That's my bad.
Oh, it had to be. Ambient light rejecting. I mean, I would be shocked if they weren't using an ALR screen in the demo.
Right.
Because it's on a show floor.
Sure. Well, but they had them sort of in these dark alcoves.
Yeah, okay. Still.
Yeah.
And then one thing you pointed out to me that I thought was really cool was an ultra short throw projector with a rollable screen integrated into the case.
Yep.
So this is very cool. So it's an ultra short throw projector sitting there right in front of the screen, right below it. And the screen, motorized, rolls up when you want to watch the TV and rolls down when you're done. This isn't new.
And the projector kind of pops out where you see there's actually, I didn't crop this. I left the Hisense in so I'd remember whose it was. A little door opens up and oh my goodness, there's a projector there.
Ah, okay. So that's pretty cool too.
Yeah. I mean, there's a company called AWOL, which I've always thought was sort of a strange name for anybody that's been around the military. But AWOL has had sets like that at CEDIA for quite a while. This is the first time one of the main brands has shown that.
Yeah.
Oh, Hisense claims, let me flip my notes back here.
Yes.
Hisense claims 63% of the 100-inch TVs that are sold, regardless of brands, are USTs. Which kind of makes sense.
It makes total sense.
You look at the cost and the ease of installation.
Yes.
Good luck getting that 116-inch set through the door.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good point.
It folds in the middle once.
Only once.
Only once.
Okay, let's move on to LG. They had their 2025 lineup.
Yep.
Which you can tell in their model numbers because they end in a 5.
Well, 5's better than 4.
Indeed. So they had their M5, which is a pretty high end.
That one also looked very, very good.
Very good. And the step down, if you want to call it that, G5, both of which are in their Evo OLED line, brighter than last year, faster refresh rates. We've been talking about gaming, and a lot of these TVs are up to 144 or 165 hertz refresh rate.
And G-Sync and FreeSync.
Right. From NVIDIA and I forget who the other one is.
Those guys.
Those other
AMD.
guys. Yeah. Yeah. Variable refresh rate. They have this new remote. We talked about it in part 1 that recognizes different voices, allows more conversational commands, and of course,
it's tied into the, dare I say it, the AI thing.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. They also introduced the C5 and the B5, which are their step-down models. I often recommend the C series of LG OLEDs because they're more expensive than most LCD TVs, but not astronomical.
And again, it reaches a point of diminishing returns.
Exactly.
Where you almost have to convince yourself that it's better.
Yeah.
Because if you put them side by side, unless you're, a colorist or Joe Kane or whomever, would you really be able to tell which is which? Mm-hmm. And I would gather that, or did I clean my glasses off within the last hour? Because I'm always, doing that when I take off my reading glasses, which I'm wearing now, or my non-reading glasses. And, how many people can really tell the difference? I mean, it's, true.
Yeah. One thing I will say about the M5 is that they now have something new from LG called the Zero Connect box, which transmits.
And Samsung has their version.
Samsung has their version. We'll talk about that in a minute. But this transmits audio-video signals wirelessly.
Yep.
To the TV, which means a wall-mounted TV won't have as many wires. It still have power.
Yep.
But it won't have HDMI, for example.
And they were so meticulous about that the wires that are there, or for the power, there's a recess in the back of the set so that you can mount it as close to the wall as possible.
Ah, okay. Very good.
But they're really very design aware.
Yeah. Okay, next up, Panasonic. They were back big time. They used to be
big time. And in fact, we've been talking about the legacy brands.
Yes.
And there's a legacy brand that is returning big time. And one of the hallmarks that LG has been using is that a lot of the colorists here in Hollywood and elsewhere have been using those in their mastering applications. Mark Wheelish, who I think is a longtime journalist and big colorist, does a lot of restorations.
Yeah.
In his studio, he's got a big LG. That's his master monitor. But a lot of the post houses have been using Panasonics, and now they're going back. They had a full line of both OLEDs and LCD LEDs.
Amazing. They showed, for example, the Z95B OLED, which has this new LG 4-layer panel, which we talked about.
Yep.
And you said it was really outstanding picture quality.
Yep. And it really, really was. And they had it in the dark, back room where it looked good. But more importantly, they had it out on the show floor, and it looked really good, even on the show floor.
With all that ambient light.
Yep.
Now, interestingly, it's based on the Fire TV platform.
Okay.
With what?
That's why God invented Rokus. And again, as we've said before, they're selling eyeballs as much as they're selling TVs. This is razors and blades. This is as old as King Gillette. King Gillette should have got Nobel Prize for thinking up selling razors and blades. And that's what this is. This is sets and eyeballs and ears.
Right. I think we didn't mention when we were talking about LG, and I can put it in here because Panasonic's doing the same thing, using this new 4-layer OLED structure.
Yes.
And doing away with micro lens array, or MLA, which was their big technological feature of the last couple of years.
Right. And this is whatever it does, however it does it really, really well. It's brighter. There's more contrast. But then you go into the secret sauce. LG has theirs. Panasonic has theirs. And in fact, a lot of the press people, myself included, were sort of confused as to whether they were actually using the same panel. And it is the same panel, but driven by a different processor.
Right. It was interesting that LG didn't seem to tout this 4-layer structure as much as Panasonic.
They were, I wouldn't put words in their mouth, they were a little apologetic when in some of the press briefings when people say, well, where's MLA? Well, we got something new. But it was sort of odd that they did not make a big deal out of it. But the picture, trust me, the pictures are good.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. Panasonic also showed the W95B, which is a mini LED LCD TV, which they said had 2.5 times the number of dimming zones from last year's W95A. Although I read in one of the reports from the show that it's still below 1,000 dimming zones. You said people weren't talking about dimming zones this year, and okay,
no,
fine.
And in fact, not only were they not talking about dimming zones, I know you'll get to it in a bit, TCL was saying, enough with the dimming zones. It's not just about the dimming zones.
Which is true.
And it's about how does the picture look? And if you're a home theater geek, you want to know how it got there, but your partner or significant other doesn't care.
Right.
They just, damn, that's a good picture. Gee, that's a crappy picture. Well, why not? Well, it doesn't have enough dimming zones. I didn't ask you that. And I think that that's a very correct marketing approach. And TCL mentioned that more than once in their presentations.
Yeah. I was amazed to read in the Panasonic press materials that this mini LED LCD TV does not use quantum dots. They're using phosphors. And again, this is Home Theater Geek, so I can get geeky.
I didn't see that whilst I was at the show, so I wasn't able to ask them.
Yeah.
But, you have to say they had a reason. Reason number one could have been cost. Reason number two could have been because.
Right.
Buy the OLED. That's why. Buy the OLED.
Buy the OLED. Right. Well, it's what I would say anyway.
Sure.
Okay. Samsung. Moving on to Samsung. They have OLED TVs. These are quantum dot OLED, QD OLED.
Yep.
At least their top one, the S95F, which I only found this kind of semi-boring picture of. They also have the S90F, S85F. These are all OLEDs. The S95F is QD OLED. The 90 and 85 are regular OLED or WOLED.
Oh, you caught.
And the S95F has a refresh rate up to 165 hertz. So again, and the QD
gaming is clearly an important marketing point for all of the brands.
Yes.
They touted VRR and they touted the 144, 160 and onward.
Yep. Now here was a really interesting spec I found. The QD OLED, the S95F, can get up to 4,000 nits of peak brightness, which I've never heard an OLED could do that before.
But again, you go back to what some of my colorist friends say. When Dolby first came out with their master monitor for Dolby Vision, it was some ridiculous amount of nits at the time. And some of the colorists were saying, I have to take a break every 15 minutes because they're too bloody bright.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the brightness.
True.
It's not just about, and again, I kid him. He's a very good friend of mine. Joe Kane would say it's not about the brightness, it's about the contrast. And he's right. And, people have to really look at the picture in totality to really see, is this the right picture that I want? And is it better than the other one?
Right.
I hate to say it in this forum. Sometimes you got to put the specs aside.
True. But at the moment, specs are all I got. So.
Specs live. Specs
live. Okay. They also had some mini LEDs.
Right. We're back to Samsung. Yes, the one thing that they did have, which was in the secret room, which is not available yet, but tagging on to what Hisense is doing with mini LED RGBs, Samsung, this is not available now. This was in the secret room and not on the floor. But they did show, and they wouldn't let me take a picture of it, so I apologize, but they didn't let me take a picture of it. A micro LED backlight that was RGB. Now, micro LED is what is the wall. It's that same.
Right. It's normally used in direct view.
Teeny weeny tiny LEDs that were RGBs in the same dome. And the advantage there, as Hisense pointed out, by having individual RGB LEDs, you can not only get better contrast by turning the cell on and off, you can turn the color on and off.
Or change it.
And when you combine that with the advanced processing, that's where you really start to get good pictures. And again, I asked the folks from Samsung, like, micro LED, you're going to confuse the damn daylights out of people. And they said, it's not available yet. That will change.
Right.
But that's something it's coming. But they wouldn't even say when, and they sure as heck wouldn't say at what price.
Yeah.
But damn, was the picture good.
Nah, the picture, I'm sure, was really, really good. So they did have two 8K mini LED backlit TVs, QN990F and QN900F. This is a picture.
They were the ones pushing 8K the most.
They were Samsung.
And they have always been and continue to.
Yeah. How important it is, I still don't think it's that important.
No. And in fact, as I recall, LG did not introduce a new 8K set. The 8K set's a carryover.
Right. And they Samsung introduced, like LG, a wireless connection box. They call it Wireless One Connect.
Yeah, and it's a thing.
It's a thing.
And it's worth something to those to whom it's worth it. If that's necessary for the installation and you don't want to snake wires back behind the wall or put something over them, if you can afford
then it's worth something.
Have at it. Sure.
Yeah. They also introduced a bunch of new 4K TVs.
Yep.
Again, with refresh rates up to 165, sizes up to 115 inches. So once again, we're getting into the really big TVs.
Yep.
I also thought it was interesting they introduced their second generation of the Frame, which is this art TV.
They took a little bit of heat for the picture quality.
Did they?
When it wasn't, of the original Frame.
Of the original.
In the community.
Yeah.
And they stepped up the bar on that, and the quality was good. And, they talked about, art from the Musée to something or other, and the Art Basel. I think I went to school with him. And, and again, it's not particularly something that's of interest to me, but I'm one person. And to this lady here, she's clearly got a much nicer house than I do. It's real art. So, good for her. And back at CEDIA, they showed speakers that matched the Frame display. So they're all into that concept, and apparently are doing very well because TCL has a similar concept.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yep.
Although that leads us right into TCL.
Yep.
Which is interesting in that they have a lab in China where they develop mini LED technology. And they make their own mini LEDs for their backlights. So they're totally vertically integrated.
They are the vertical integrated company.
Right.
And the division that makes the displays is called CSOT, China Star Optical, something that starts with the T.
Yeah.
And they claim to be the largest manufacturer of LCD panels. And that gives them the expertise. And then when you combine that with the lab, they cook up a lot of stuff, and then they get to use it in their sets and sell some, but not all of it, to their customers.
Right. So the main product that they showed was the QM6K.
The only really new set that they showed. And they were very forthwith about that during their pre-show event, and they said, more is coming.
Okay. So this is a quantum dot-based mini LED backlight TV, LCD TV. They claim to have increased brightness by over 50%, 500 dimming zones, 98% of DCI P3 color gamut. They even gave prices. They start at 50 inches for $750.
That's not bad.
Which is not bad
for a high end set.
Yeah, exactly. The 65 is $1,000, 75 $1,300, 85 $2,000, 98 inches for $3,500.
And you look at what those used to cost.
Yes.
If you remember back, and it wasn't in the grand scheme of things that long ago.
Yep.
The original Panasonic 103-inch plasma. Remember that?
I remember that one.
6 figures.
6 figures. Yep. And you had to build your house to get it into the house. You had to build the house around it.
Bill Gates did.
Yes. Well, as you pointed out, they hinted at some stuff, including the QM7K.
Right.
And they showed another 115-incher, the QM891G, which you have a picture of.
The world's largest QD mini LED TV.
There it is.
And again, with apologies for it's time to buy a new DSLR. But yes, they're all really good. And I hate to be repetitive, but they all looked really good. And it was just really hard to say what was the best one at the show.
Very hard to say. You also got a picture. Sorry, go ahead.
And along with it, you can see in the back where that fellow's standing, where it says world's leading technology, that they were showcasing all of the different aspects of their technology from the lab and from CSOT that really, have them get the advantages that they're able to offer.
You also got a picture of the 163-inch micro LED direct view.
Yep. And I had to stand far back enough in order to get people out of the way. Sir, can you get out of the way? For goodness sakes, I have to take a picture of Scott Wilkinson. And I should have cropped that down. I apologize.
Well, I wanted to get it in context. I could have cropped it.
It was huge.
But I actually wanted to see it.
It was really hard to take pictures of all these 100+ inch sets. I was shooing people away like crazy.
And I think you mentioned that TCL, or there were some rumors that some high-end TCL sets would be using RGB mini LEDs in their backlights.
Later. They were not saying that to the extent that the others were.
Yeah.
They were focused on other aspects that are coming now in their mini LED backlighting.
Right. So, a couple other pieces of TV news before we wrap this part up. Sharp was back. Sharp.
Remember them?
They used to have huge press conferences. I remember one where
they were a main brand. They made their own sets. I believe they in the recent years they've had some financial difficulties. They were a primary LCD panel manufacturers.
Yep.
They were the first Gen 7, Gen 8 Kamiyama that had a huge. I've been to their factory, not to the panel factory. I've been to the assembly factories in Japan, and they're huge, but they had financial difficulties, and they're now, I believe, owned by Foxconn. Like, if you've got an iPhone, you know what Foxconn is.
Right, exactly.
But they are back.
And powered by TiVo. I thought TiVo had more or less disappeared as well.
Well, TiVo, I got one right over there, and you can take that TiVo from my cold dead hands. But that's a topic for another show, perhaps.
Yeah.
But it is that when we talked about OS earlier and in part one, some of the manufacturers that don't have the wherewithal or the desire, as Tizen does at Samsung or WebOS does at LG, to develop their own OS. That's why TCL doesn't have their own OS. It was Roku, and it still is to some extent, or it's Google TV.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I got to take a drink here.
Yeah, go right ahead. You're sitting in the middle of very bad air quality in Los Angeles
don't
right
go
now.
out without don't go out. I dug out all those masks. Let me tell you.
Good.
In fact, they're saying don't even use KNs. I've got to see if I can find some N95, or you'll see people on the news with the respirator types.
Yeah.
It was really bad. But
anyway, Sharp TV and
TiVo OS lets them say, let somebody else do the ad sales. We'll just take a piece of it. Let somebody else take the time and expense to develop it, do the ad sales, and then we'll wrap our video processing around it. And for a brand like Sharp that's coming back into the market, that makes sense. Panasonic, there's no Panasonic OS. They're using the Fakakta Fire TV.
Yeah.
Sony clearly could make their own OS if they wanted to, but
they use Google.
They don't have to, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a brand decision. But by the way, I also saw, not at CES, or I didn't see it because I had to leave early.
Yeah.
But Sharp is also going to introduce sets with Zumo. XUMO, which is a joint venture between Charter and Comcast, or
content.
The two largest cable companies.
Yep.
Comcast also happens to own NBC and Universal, and Charter, which is Spectrum, is actually now, I think, as big, with some of the fall off in subscriptions for in terms of cable. So they have their own OS and their own TVs, which are a little bit more tightly integrated into, if you're a Comcast or Charter cable subscriber. But again, which one is better? There are ones that I like, there are ones that you like, but do you like a carousel or do you like tiles? Roku is tiles, where you see the little blocks. Google and Fire are carousel, where you run them across the screen. Apple TV is tiles. So which OS do you, as a consumer, prefer? And again, you can either do it and let that guide your TV technology choice. I wouldn't do it, and I don't think many of the people here would do it. They'd rather have a better looking TV. And if they don't like the OS, buy a Roku.
Right.
Or a Zumo, or a Fire TV, or an NVIDIA Shield, still around and still the best for video people.
Yeah.
So, but that's what makes it a ball game.
Yeah. ATSC 3.0, otherwise known as Next Gen TV.
Indeed, and they were there, and they announced, again, we were talking about RCA before.
Yep.
RCA and a company that I have to confess I'm not familiar with, Slivox.
I think, Silvox, I would pronounce.
Them too. Yeah. Well, I guess Slivox doesn't sound right. And they're big on outdoor TVs. And if you think about it, that actually makes sense, because if it's an outdoor TV, you just stick a coat hanger on the back and you get TV.
May not be quite that simple.
Well, but there are more set now. Would I buy a new TV just to get ATSC 3.0 next gen? No. And I'm a big fan and proponent of it, but I'm not going to buy a new TV for it. Thus, I have a Zapper box, which is really good, a Zinwell, which is really good, even though it's got a funky name, an ADTH, which is okay, but it's a way for, anywhere from $79. A Walmart is selling one of these boxes. And
so these are ATSC 3.0 receiver boxes, outboard boxes that you connect an antenna to.
Just like 20 years ago, you bought a box to get 1.0. This is a box that gets you 3.0.
Yep.
But for example, here in LA, where 5 of the stations are now next gen, the stations that were 720 are now 1080. The stations that were 1080i are now 1080p. I can get HDR or Dolby Vision over the air.
Yeah.
I don't need to pay no stinking cable. And there are more things, games, and other auxiliary services that are coming. And some of the NBC stations, KNBC here in LA, has got an app. So if you're a true cord cutter, as long as you don't cut the cord to the antenna, I've got much of the functionality of streaming in terms of news services, or they even have a play from the beginning. So what is it? It's 20 to 5 here in LA. And when we're over, if I turn on the news, just know that I wanted to see the beginning of the 4:00 news to get the press conference on the fires, I could just press the go to beginning app button. And, and that's worth it. And they are going to have a much more advanced early warning system. So it's a thing. And the fact that it will deliver HDR or Dolby Vision or HDR10 Plus, which they also announced that I will talk about, is something that I encourage everybody to at least consider.
Right. Speaking of which, HDR10 Plus was continuing to gain ground at CES.
Indeed, they were.
And they announced adoption for some content by Disney Plus. In addition,
and in Apple TV,
Paramount, Prime Video, YouTube.
All the Prime video stuff is HDR10 Plus, or so they said. And I know the guy who runs that, and I believe them. And they had, sort of as an aside, there are now dual mode encoders. So if there is a sporting event, and that's the big play for local TV right now, that that a broadcaster will be able to encode both HDR10 Plus and Dolby Vision. It's all about the metadata on the same show.
Yeah.
How that's going to happen with these devices remains to be seen. But, for example, Samsung doesn't have Dolby Vision. They have HDR10 Plus.
Correct.
LG has Dolby Vision, but they may not, as somebody says in the chat room, Ozark Chief, there's no HDR10 Plus in his LG C2. So all of this is, this is all a way to make it as friendly as they can for the consumer to deliver the best possible picture.
Yep. Well, that was an awful lot of stuff, wasn't it?
Yep. It was a good it really was, in spite of the fact that I had to go home a day early.
Yeah.
It was a good show. And again, I think the bottom line in terms of video, what we've been talking about for this part 2, is yes, there were some significant, even without cleaning off my glasses, ability to see improvements.
Well, I'm looking forward to 2025 in the TV world then, for sure.
We're looking for a better world for everybody.
Indeed. So can you stick around for part 3? We'll talk about some audio stuff.
Sure. Unfortunately, I missed a lot of the audio stuff. But yeah, actually, there's some of the stuff that I will put some 3 cents in.
Good. Looking forward to it.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Scott.
Sure, you bet. Before we go, tell us again where we can find your writings.
Residential Tech Today, which strangely enough has a print edition.
What?
I know. What is that about?
That's European. In a previous episode.
No. Residential Tech is North American.
Oh.
They have a quarterly print edition, but they have, daily online things. I haven't put any of my stuff in there yet, but somebody clearly did. And that's www.restechtoday.com. And I have a feature in every issue about that. Mm-hmm. And then there's Hidden Wires, which is an amazing European publication.
That's the European one.
Yes, which also covers the UK and North America. And they have some I did an article about Barbenheimer and what that means to us.
Right.
And that's hiddenwires.co.uk. And they have a bi-monthly print edition, and a 4 times a week. And when I get my my butt in gear here, you'll see some content for me there.
Okay, very good. Well, thanks so much for being here for part 2, and look forward to seeing you in part 3.
What's geek in?
What's that?
Where we will geek out, and then we will geek
out, and we will geek in. Exactly right. So listen, if you as a listener or a viewer have a question for me, I sure hope you'll send it along to htg@twit.tv, and I will answer as many as I can right here on the show. And as always, we thank you for your support of the TWiT network with your membership in Club TWiT, which gives you access to all the TWiT shows in their video format, and you can come into the Discord and chat away. So we thank you for that. Until next time, geek out.